Every morning, the ancient Egyptians watched their god literally die and be reborn before their eyes. Ra, the sun god, didn't just rule Egypt. He created the entire universe from tears of joy, spoke light into existence from primordial darkness, and fought a cosmic serpent of chaos every single night to ensure dawn would return. For over 3,000 years, he was the beating heart of the world's greatest civilization, transforming from a simple solar deity into a cosmic force that merged with other gods and shaped human understanding of life, death, and resurrection. His story reveals how one god's daily journey became humanity's template for hope. Silence reigned absolute in the time before time, when existence itself had not yet drawn its first breath. In that endless moment before the world's birth, only Nun existed, the primordial waters that held within their dark depths every possibility, every potential form that would ever be. These were not waters as mortals know them, but something far more profound, the very essence of chaos, boundless and eternal, stretching through dimensions that had no names because nothing yet existed to name them. Nun was the cosmic womb, pregnant with all that would come to pass, yet empty of form or substance. Here was neither illumination nor darkness, for darkness requires the absence of brightness, and radiance had not yet been conceived. Here was neither sound nor silence, for silence needs the possibility of sound, and no voice had yet been given form to break the void. This was the realm of pure potential, where every star that would shine, every grain of sand that would fall, every breath that would be drawn, lay waiting in embryonic possibility. The endless expanse stretched without boundary or limit, deeper than any ocean that would one day grace the earth, wider than any heavens that would arch above it. They were the primeval floods from which order would eventually emerge, turbulent with forces that had no outlet, stormy with energies that had no purpose. Yet, within these depths, something stirred, not movement as mortals understand it, for there was no space through which to move, but rather the first trembling of awareness, the initial spark of consciousness awakening to its own being. From the heart of these limitless deeps, the first miracle occurred. The Benben stone, the primeval mound, began to rise, pushing upward through the boundless expanse like the first mountain breaking the surface of a cosmic sea. This was no ordinary stone, no simple rock formed by earthly processes, but rather the crystallization of pure will, the physical manifestation of intent to forge something from nothing. Its surface gleamed with an inner radiance that had never known shadow, its facets reflecting possibilities that had never been explored. Upon this sacred mound, as the first solid surface in all reality established itself against the turmoil of Nun, came the moment that changed everything. Ra emerged, not born as mortals are born, not crafted as artisans craft, but manifesting through sheer force of will. In that instant of emergence, he was simultaneously ancient beyond measure and newly awakened to consciousness, bearing within himself the accumulated wisdom of unspoken eternities, yet experiencing for the first time the joy of being. But the Sun Lord was not singular in his manifestation. Even in his first moment of awareness, he revealed the truth that would govern all his days. He was one deity wearing three faces, three aspects of the same essence expressing different moments of eternal time. At dawn, he was Capri, the scarab beetle who would push the solar disk across the heavens, rolling brilliance before him like the sacred beetle rolls its ball of earth. At midday, he blazed as the falcon-headed sovereign whose piercing gaze could see all things in all places. When evening came, he transformed into Atum, the Ancient One, the completed deity who had experienced all that the day could offer. Standing upon the Benben stone, the Maker surveyed the limitless floods of Nun, and felt within his heart the first stirring of solitude. Though he was complete in himself, though he contained within his being all the power that ever was or would be, something fundamental was missing from reality. The universe needed companions for its architect, children for its father, order for its turmoil. With this realization came the first act of will beyond his own manifestation. The Sun Lord opened his mouth and spoke the first word ever uttered in the cosmos. The sound rang across none like thunder rolling through empty caverns, like lightning splitting the darkness of the void. With that word came Shu, Lord of the air that would one day fill the lungs of living beings, master of the breath that would separate heavens from earth. Shu manifested not as his father had, slowly, deliberately, through an act of supreme will, but suddenly, like an explosion of energy made flesh. Even as Shu took his first breath of life, the architect spoke again, and from his lips came Tefnut, goddess of moisture, she who would bring the rains that nourish, the dew that refreshes, the tears that cleanse. Where Shu was the expansion of air and space, Tefnut was the promise of life-giving liquid, different from the chaotic floods of Nun, as the gentle rain differs from the destructive deluge. She was moisture with purpose, fluid with intent, the complement to her brother's airy realm. Together, Shu and Tefnut began their cosmic dance, their union forging the first harmonious relationship in all being. From their love came new life, new possibilities that even their father had not foreseen. Geb arose from their embrace, solid and enduring as the earth itself, his body destined to become the foundation upon which all life would rest. His skin would be the soil that feeds the growing grain, his bones the mountains that reach toward heaven, his blood the rivers that carry life from source to sea. Following Geb came Nut, goddess of the firmament, her body arching gracefully over her brother-husband like the vault of the celestial dome itself. Her flesh would be the blue expanse that holds the clouds, her hair the stars that guide travelers through the darkness, her tears the rain that falls upon Geb's welcoming earth. In the union of earth and sky, the basic structure of the physical universe found its form. But the work was not yet complete. From the union of Geb and Nut came 4 children who would shape the destiny of all life to come. First arose Osiris, lord of the fertile earth, master of growing things, he who would one day rule over the realm of the dead with wisdom and compassion. His skin was the green of new growth, his bearing the dignity of one born to rule, his heart filled with love for all living things. Beside Osiris came Isis, goddess of magic and wisdom, she whose knowledge would encompass the healing arts, the mysteries of life and death, the secret names that hold power over deities and mortals alike. Her beauty was not merely physical, but radiated from her intelligence, her understanding of the deeper truths that govern being. In her hands, magic became not mere trickery, but the fundamental force that binds the universe together. Third came Set, lord of disorder and the desert, master of storms and upheaval, necessary darkness to balance the brightness of his brothers and sisters. Where Osiris brought order and growth, Set brought change and challenge, the harsh winds that test the strength of what grows, the tempests that clear away the old to make room for the new. Though he would one day bring sorrow to his family, his role in the grand design was essential. Without upheaval, order becomes stagnation. Without challenge, strength never develops. Last came Nephthys, goddess of mourning and rebirth, she who would guide the dead through their transition from life to afterlife, companion to sorrows and herald of new beginnings. Her beauty was touched with melancholy, her wisdom tinged with the knowledge of endings, but in her hands, every ending became a promise of renewal, every death a doorway to transformation. Thus was born the Ennead, the 9 great deities who would govern the forces of the cosmos. The Sun Lord stood at their head as the source from which all had manifested, while his children and grandchildren took their places as masters of the elements, guardians of the cosmic order that was even now taking shape around them. But even as the architect rejoiced in his growing family, his essence manifested yet another miracle. As he wept tears of joy at the beauty of what he had wrought, those tears fell upon the fresh earth that Geb had become. Where they touched the soil, something unprecedented occurred. Mortal life began to stir. From the sun, Lord's tears, came the first humans, creatures who would be neither fully immortal nor bound entirely to earth, but something wonderfully new. Beings capable of worshipping their maker while possessing the freedom to choose their own paths. These first mortals looked up at their progenitor with eyes that reflected his own radiance, and in that moment of recognition, the relationship between immortals and humans was established. They would be his children, loved and guided, but not controlled, blessed with the gift of choice that even the deities respected. Through them, the Sun Lord's handiwork would become not merely a work of art, but a living, growing expression of love. As he contemplated his new children, the architect felt within his eye a stirring of protective power. The eye, his organ of sight that could perceive all things across all dimensions, began to manifest an independent being. From it arose the Uraeus, the sacred cobra that would become the symbol of authority, the protector of pharaohs, the embodiment of watchful care over his handiwork. The serpent coiled around his brow, its hood expanded in threat to any who would harm what the Sun Lord had made, its eyes blazing with the same fire that burned in his own gaze. With the birth of the Uraeus, the Maker established the principle of Ma'at, cosmic order, universal balance, the law that would govern all being, from the movements of stars to the beating of mortal hearts. Ma'at was not merely a concept, but a living force, a goddess who would ensure that truth prevailed over falsehood, justice over disorder, harmony over discord. She took her place among the immortals as the foundation upon which all their actions would be judged, the standard by which even divine power would be measured. Standing upon the Ben stone, surrounded by the family he had called forth, watching over the mortals born from his tears, the Sun Lord felt the first moment of complete satisfaction in all being. The universe was no longer empty potential, but realized beauty, no longer chaotic possibility, but ordered perfection. The primeval floods of Nun still stretched to infinity around them, but now they held not turmoil, but potential for further growth, not threat, but promise of continued development. Yet even in this moment of triumph, he knew that his work was far from finished. The physical universe had been shaped, the celestial family established, the first mortals given life. But now came the greater challenge. How would this realm be sustained? How would order be maintained against the eternal pull toward disorder? How would the brilliance he had brought into being continue to shine against the darkness that still lurked at the edges of reality? The answer came to him with the clarity of divine inspiration. He would become not merely the architect, but the sustainer, not merely the father of deities, but their active protector. Each day, he would journey across the heavens, carrying illumination to every corner of the cosmos, driving back the shadows that threatened to reclaim what he had made. Each night, he would descend into the underworld, facing the forces of turmoil in direct combat, ensuring that dawn would always follow darkness, that death would always give way to rebirth, This would be his eternal mission, his purpose, his gift to all he had fashioned. As the first dawn began to break across the newborn firmament, as Khepri began his first journey pushing the solar disk across the vault of heaven, as the radiance of the new world touched every corner of the universe for the first time, the Sun Lord made his commitment to the cosmos he had brought into being. He would be their eternal guardian, their constant protector, their never-failing source of brilliance and life, through the endless cycles of day and night, through all the ages yet to come, through whatever challenges might arise from the disorder that still surrounded their small island of order in the infinite sea of Nun. He would be there, watching over them, sustaining them, loving them with the infinite devotion of a father for his children. The age of forging was complete. The age of protection was about to begin. And in the first rays of that first dawn, as illumination conquered darkness for the first time, but certainly not the last, the eternal story of the Sun Lord's dedication to his realm began its endless telling. From the sacred Benben stone, surrounded by the immortals he had called into being, watching over the mortals born of his divine tears, the architect looked out upon the universe he had made and saw that it was good. But more than good, it was beloved. And for love of what he had wrought, he would spend eternity ensuring its survival, its growth, its eventual triumph over all the forces that would seek to drag it back into the primordial turmoil from which it had emerged. The first dawn was breaking. The first day was beginning. And with it, the greatest story ever told. The story of a deity's eternal love for his handiwork was taking its first steps toward immortality. In those first golden ages, when the world was young and unmarked by sorrow, Ra descended from his celestial throne to walk among the beings he had fashioned from his tears. The earth itself trembled with joy at his footsteps. Flowers bloomed where his shadow fell, and the very air shimmered with divine presence. This was the time of Marat triumphant, when truth and justice flowed like the life-giving Nile, when harmony reigned between heaven and earth, when gods and mortals dwelt together in perfect understanding. The sun god established his palace not in the distant heavens, but upon the fertile soil of the Black Land, where his children could approach him, where his wisdom could guide their daily lives, where his judgments could settle their disputes. The palace rose from the earth, like a mountain of polished stone and gleaming gold, its walls reflecting the eternal fire that burned within its master's heart. From its highest tower, the Uraeus watched over all the lands, its cobra eyes vigilant against any threat to the established order. Under Ra's direct rule, the world knew abundance beyond mortal imagination. The Nile rose at precisely the right season, neither too high nor too low, bringing rich black silt that turned the fields into gardens of plenty. Grain grew tall and golden, fruit hung heavy on the branches, and the herds multiplied until the pastures could barely contain them. Disease was unknown, for the Creator's radiance drove away all corruption. War was a concept without meaning, for who would dare raise arms when Ra himself dispensed justice with perfect wisdom? The first humans lived lives that stretched for centuries, their bodies remaining strong and beautiful as long as they walked in Ma'at's light. They built cities of white limestone that gleamed like stars upon the land, raised temples whose columns reached toward heaven, and composed songs that praised their ruler with voices that never grew weary. Children played in gardens where lions lay down with lambs, where serpents spoke wisdom instead of poison, where the very stones sang with contentment. Governance flowed not through force, but through love, not through fear, but through the irresistible pull of absolute righteousness. When disputes arose between his children, the sun god would sit beneath the sacred Persea tree in his palace courtyard, listening to each voice with infinite patience. His judgments were so perfectly wise that even those who lost their cases would thank him for the privilege of hearing truth spoken with such clarity. The victorious would share their rewards with the defeated, for in the presence of perfect justice, generosity became as natural as breathing. Ra's court was a wonder that defied description. Isis sat at his right hand, her wisdom complementing his power, her magic weaving protections around the kingdom that made it a sanctuary from all harm. Osiris managed the growing things with such skill that every seed planted yielded 100-fold harvest. Thoth recorded every word of wisdom that fell from the ruler's lips, creating the first libraries where knowledge could be preserved for future generations. Even Set, the lord of storms and disorder, found his rightful place in this perfect realm, his tempests coming only when needed to clear the air. But mortals, blessed with the gift of choice that their creator had given them, began to look upon their golden age and grow restless. Generations passed in perfect peace, and the descendants of those first tears no longer remembered the darkness from which they had been rescued. They saw their sovereign's kindness and began to mistake it for weakness. They observed his patience and wondered if it masked uncertainty. They witnessed his justice and questioned whether a truly powerful ruler would need to listen to every voice before making decisions. Whispers began in the marketplaces, quiet conversations that would have been unthinkable in earlier ages. The poison of ingratitude spread slowly but surely through the perfect kingdom, carried by those who had never known, want questioning the source of their abundance. These murmurs grew bolder with each passing season, as prosperity bred contempt for the hand that provided it. The rebellion, when it finally came, shocked heaven and earth with its audacity. Not content merely to cease their worship, the humans demanded that Ra prove his divinity through trials of their own devising. They challenged his wisdom with questions designed to trap him in contradictions. They tested his patience with deliberate provocations. They mocked his authority by deliberately committing crimes in his presence, then claiming that a truly omnipotent ruler would have prevented them rather than simply punishing them afterward. Most heartbreaking of all, they began to turn his own gifts against him. The grain he had caused to grow in abundance, they hoarded to create artificial scarcity. The tools of craftsmanship he had inspired them to create, they turned into weapons. The knowledge he had allowed them to gather, they used to devise ever more elaborate insults to his dignity. The very tears from which they had been born, they claimed were merely water, no different from any other droplet that fell from the sky. For long ages, the Creator endured their provocations with the infinite patience of a father, watching his children test the boundaries of his love. He continued to rise each dawn, continued to bring the rains in their season, continued to bless the land with fertility and abundance. When they spat at his messengers, he sent others with gentler words. When they defaced his temples, he caused new ones to rise overnight, more beautiful than before. But even divine patience has its limits. The day came when the sun god looked upon his beloved children and saw that their rebellion had reached its ultimate expression. They were teaching their young ones to curse his name, to spit at the mention of higher authority, to believe that they themselves were the highest form of existence in all the cosmos. The poison of pride had spread so thoroughly through their hearts that they could no longer recognize the source of their own breath, let alone show gratitude for it. On that dark day, as the sovereign watched his most beloved creations dance around a golden calf they had fashioned to mock his divine nature, something fundamental shifted in the cosmic order. The age of pure mercy was ending. The time had come for justice to reveal its other face, not the gentle correction of a loving parent, but the terrible necessity of judgment that preserves order against the forces of chaos. Ra's eye, the uraeus that coiled around his brow, began to burn with a fire that made the sun itself seem pale by comparison. From within that sacred serpent came a new manifestation of divine power, a daughter born from the very wrath of the Creator himself. She took the form of a lioness, her golden fur blazing with the fury of 1,000 suns, her claws sharp enough to tear through the fabric of reality itself, her roar capable of shaking the foundations of the earth. This was Sekhmet, the mighty one, the powerful one, the Lady of Slaughter. She leaped down from her father's brow like a falling star, landing upon the earth with such force that mountains cracked and rivers changed their courses. Her very presence transformed the perfect garden of the realm into a hunting ground where divine retribution would stalk those who had forgotten their place in the cosmic order. The lioness goddess wasted no time in beginning her terrible work. Those who had mocked Ra's name found their voices turned to dust in their throats. Those who had proclaimed their independence from higher authority discovered that without divine protection, they were prey to every danger they had forgotten existed. Sekhmet's rampage was not random violence, but precise, surgical vengeance. She struck first at the ringleaders of the uprising, those who had led others into ingratitude and blasphemy. But as the lioness continued her hunt, as her divine fury found expression in an ever-widening circle of devastation, something unexpected began to happen. The righteous anger that had given Sekhmet birth began to feed upon itself, growing stronger with each act of vengeance, more terrible with each judgment rendered. What had begun as precise retribution started to become indiscriminate slaughter as she lost herself in the intoxicating wine of rage. Soon, Sekhmet was no longer distinguishing between the guilty and the innocent, between those who had led the rebellion and those who had merely followed. Her hunger for blood became insatiable, her thirst for vengeance unquenchable. She began to see every mortal as a potential threat, every human heart as a nest of future rebellion that needed to be crushed before it could spread. The sun god watched from his palace with growing alarm as his instrument of justice transformed into an engine of annihilation. Sekhmet stalked through his perfect kingdom like a wildfire consuming everything in its path, her roars of triumph echoing across a landscape increasingly marked by devastation. Where once had stood cities of white limestone, now only rubble remained. Where once had bloomed gardens of impossible beauty, now only ash fertilized the soil. It slowly dawned on the Creator with a chill of fear that what he'd started was now slipping from his grasp. Sekhmet had taken on an existence of her own, driven by a fury so pure and terrible that even her father could not simply command it to cease. She was wrath incarnate, the shadow side of justice that had always existed, but had never before been given independent form. As night fell over the devastated realm, and the lioness goddess continued her hunt by moonlight, the sovereign retreated to his palace to contemplate the magnitude of what he had unleashed. The age of perfect harmony was ending in blood and fire, and it was his own divine nature that was bringing about its destruction. Tomorrow would bring either the end of mortal life on earth, or the beginning of a new kind of relationship between the divine and the mortal. The palace had never known such silence. Isis approached her father with steps that seemed to carry the weight of the world, her face marked by sorrow deeper than the Nile's flooding. Thoth stepped forward with scrolls unrolled, his careful records telling the tale in stark numbers. In 3 days, Sekhmet had destroyed 90 cities, slain hundreds of thousands, and showed no sign of slowing her rampage. But the answer came from an unexpected source. Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, who had remained silent throughout the crisis, stepped forward with a plan so simple yet so profound that it could only have emerged from the deepest wisdom of the feminine divine. She proposed that they could transform the very nature of Sekhmet's perception through a carefully crafted deception. Hathor's strategy was both elegant and audacious. They would brew beer, not ordinary beer, but divine beer, infused with the red ochre of the earth, until it resembled blood in every detail. This crimson liquid would be poured out across the fields, where Sekhmet was expected to hunt the following dawn. The lioness, seeing what appeared to be lakes of blood from her victims, would assume she had been far more successful in her slaughter than even she realized. But the beer, while appearing to be blood, would carry within it the essence of joy, celebration, and peaceful intoxication. Instead of feeding Sekhmet's rage, it would transform her fury into euphoria, her bloodlust into benevolent contentment. The Lady of Slaughter would become, through this divine stratagem, the Lady of Love and Celebration that Hathor herself embodied. Throughout the night, as Sekhmet continued her rampage in distant provinces, the divine court worked with desperate efficiency. Vast quantities of beer were brewed in the palace kitchens, each drop infused with red ochre until it gleamed like freshly spilled blood. Divine servants carried great jars of the mixture to the fields and meadows, pouring it out until the landscape resembled a vast battlefield soaked in the blood of the vanquished. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Sekhmet appeared as expected, her golden fur still stained with blood, her eyes blazing with undiminished hunger for vengeance. She surveyed the crimson landscape with savage satisfaction, believing that her father's wrath had worked even more efficiently than she had dared hope. Without hesitation, she lowered her great head and began to drink deeply of what she believed to be the blood of her enemies. The transformation was as swift as it was complete. With each draught of the divine beer, Sekhmet's terrible rage began to ebb, like a tide receding from the shore. Her roars of fury became purrs of contentment. Her burning eyes grew soft with benevolent intoxication. Her claws retracted as divine euphoria replaced divine anger. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the transformation was complete. Where Sekhmet the Destroyer had stood, now swayed Hathor the Beloved, goddess of music and dance, of love and celebration, of all the gentle pleasures that make existence worth living. Her laughter rang across the blood-soaked fields like silver bells, transforming the landscape itself. Where the false blood had been poured out, flowers began to bloom. Not the careful, cultivated flowers of the Golden Age, but wild, joyous blossoms that celebrated life in all its chaotic beauty. Ra appeared before his transformed daughter with a heart full of relief and wonder. The crisis had passed, but its lessons would endure forever. Divine wrath, once unleashed, could not be simply recalled. It had to be transformed. Justice without mercy led inevitably to destruction, but mercy seasoned with the memory of justice could lead to wisdom. But the crisis had taught the Creator something even more profound about the nature of his relationship with mortals. They could not remain in his immediate presence without eventually taking his gifts for granted. Like children who cease to appreciate their parents' care when it becomes routine, humans in paradise inevitably lost their sense of wonder, their gratitude, their recognition of the miraculous nature of their existence. The solution came to him with the clarity of divine inspiration. He would withdraw from direct rule over earthly affairs, ascending to the heavens where his majesty would be preserved by distance, where his gifts would be appreciated because they were not taken for granted. From the sky, he would continue to bless his children with light and warmth, with the cycles of season and weather that sustained life. But he would no longer walk among them as their visible king. This withdrawal would serve another purpose as well. It would establish the principle of divine kingship that would guide mortal rulers for all the ages to come. The pharaohs who would one day rule over Egypt would be his earthly representatives, chosen and blessed by divine authority, ruling not through their own power, but as channels for his eternal will. They would bear the title Son of Ra, marking their divine appointment while acknowledging their mortal limitations. He established the sacred regalia that would mark his earthly representatives. The uraeus crown that bore the cobra of divine protection, the crook and flail that symbolized the ruler's role as both shepherd and judge of his people, the false beard that connected the living pharaoh to the eternal wisdom of the ancestors. Each symbol carried within it the memory of the recent crisis and the promise that divine authority, properly respected, would bring not tyranny but justice. The field of reeds was created as the reward for those who lived according to Myat, a paradise where the worthy dead could dwell in eternal contentment, where the grain grew without labor, where the sun shone without scorching, where divine justice ruled without the possibility of divine wrath. This was the promise that would sustain the faithful through all the trials of mortal existence. As the sun began to set on the last day of Ra's earthly reign, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to reflect both the glory of the ending age and the promise of what was to come, the Creator prepared for his ascension to the celestial realm. The age of innocence was over. The age of earned grace was about to begin. And in the first stars that appeared in the darkening sky, mortals could see the promise that their Creator had not abandoned them, but had simply moved to a place where his majesty could never again be taken for granted. Ages passed like grains of sand through the fingers of eternity, and the Sun Lord who had once walked among mortals now ruled from the celestial sphere, his golden bark traversing the sky in its endless cycle. Yet even immortal flesh, though blessed with eternal life, was not immune to the wearing touch of countless eons. The Creator's form, which had once blazed with the vigor of the first dawn, began to show the weight of endless service to his beloved cosmos. At first, the signs were so delicate, so understated, that they slipped past even the gods most attuned to such things. His step, once sure as the march of destiny itself, grew slightly hesitant. His golden hair, which had shone like captured sunlight, began to silver at the temples. Most troubling of all, saliva sometimes escaped his lips. A small thing, perhaps, but in one whose every breath had once shaped reality, such mortal weakness was profoundly unsettling. The goddess of magic and wisdom watched these changes with growing fascination. Of all the Ennead, she alone possessed the cunning to see opportunity where others saw only the natural progression of immortal existence. Her knowledge of the secret arts had grown vast over the millennia, her understanding of the hidden forces that bound the universe together, approaching the very limits of what was knowable. Yet one mystery remained forever beyond her grasp, the true appellation of the Creator himself. This was not the title by which mortals called him, nor even the designations used by his fellow deities. Every immortal being possessed a hidden appellation, spoken only at the moment of their birth, containing within its syllables the very essence of their strength. The Sun Lord's concealed title was the most potent of all, for it held within it the authority over light and darkness, life and death, order and chaos. Whoever knew that designation would wield might second only to the Creator himself. For countless ages, Isis had sought this ultimate knowledge through every means at her disposal. She had consulted the oldest scrolls in Thoth's libraries, meditated upon the mysteries revealed in the movements of stars, even dared to question the primordial waters of none themselves. All her efforts had yielded nothing but fragments and hints, tantalizing glimpses of a truth that remained forever just beyond her reach. Now, observing the growing frailty of the sovereign, a plan began to form in her brilliant mind. Audacious beyond measure, dangerous beyond calculation, yet elegantly simple in its conception. If she could not discover the hidden designation through study or divination, perhaps she could force its revelation through necessity. Even the Maker himself, when faced with the prospect of true death, might surrender his most closely guarded secret to preserve his existence. The opportunity came on a day when the Sun Lord descended to earth to inspect one of his temples, as he still did occasionally despite his withdrawal from direct rule. The goddess followed at a distance, invisible to all eyes through her mastery of concealment, watching as her father made his stately progress through the sacred precincts. Her chance arrived when he paused to rest beside a holy pool, the weariness of ages heavy upon his shoulders. As the sovereign lowered his head to drink from the blessed waters, a single drop of saliva fell from his lips to strike the earth beside the pool. Isis moved with the swiftness of thought itself, scooping up the precious earth before it could be noticed by any other presence. Here was the very substance of his essence, the physical manifestation of his might made visible in the humblest of forms. Returning to her hidden sanctuary, the goddess began the most dangerous working of her long career. She mixed the royal saliva with clay from the banks of the sacred Nile, speaking over it incantations of such potency that the very air around her began to shimmer and crack. Under her skilled hands, the mixture took shape, not the form of any natural creature, but something far more deadly. The serpent she crafted was unlike any that had ever existed. Its venom compounded not merely of earthly poisons, but of the Creator's own strength turned against him. Her creation was a triumph of sorcery, a vision of beauty and horror perfectly entwined. Its scales gleamed with an inner fire that reflected the royal essence from which it had been born. Its eyes held depths that seemed to contain all the wisdom and malice of eternity, and its fangs dripped with a venom that could fell even an immortal. Most importantly, because it had been fashioned from the Sun Lord's own substance, it was invisible to his perception, the perfect weapon hidden in plain sight. The goddess placed her creation along the path that the sovereign traveled each day during his celestial journey, concealing it among the reeds and flowers, so that it appeared to be merely another inhabitant of the heavenly realm. Then she withdrew to wait, her heart beating with a mixture of anticipation and terror at what she had set in motion. The die was cast. Now she could only hope that her gamble would not destroy them all. Just as the sun god journeyed across the heavens in his radiant bark, shining with timeless splendor, the attack unfolded. The serpent struck without warning, its fangs piercing the immortal flesh with venom that burned like liquid fire. His cry of agony echoed across all the dimensions of reality, a sound so terrible that mortals far below threw themselves to the ground in terror, thinking that the world itself was ending. Never in all his eons of life had the Creator experienced such pain. The venom coursed through his veins like molten metal, each heartbeat spreading the agony further through his form. His vision blurred, his strength fled, and for the first time since emerging from the primordial waters of Nun, he knew the taste of mortality upon his tongue. The other deities rushed to their sovereign's aid, their faces pale with shock at seeing their mighty father brought low by a creature so seemingly insignificant. Thoth applied all his knowledge of healing arts. Horus lent his strength to support his failing grandfather, and Ptah worked his craftsman's magic to try to draw out the poison. Nothing availed. The venom, had been crafted too cunningly, born from the ruler's own essence, and thus immune to any conventional remedy. As the Sun Lord writhed in agony upon his golden throne, Isis approached with carefully composed features, her expression a perfect mask of concern and sorrow. Her voice, when she spoke, carried just the right note of desperate hope mixed with resigned wisdom. "My father," she said, kneeling beside his convulsing form, "I have studied this venom and found it unlike any natural poison. It has been crafted from sources so deep and ancient that conventional healing cannot touch it. There is only one cure that might avail. If you would speak your true appellation, the hidden designation that contains the fullness of your might, I might be able to weave a counterspell strong enough to save your life." Through his haze of agony, the royal intellect immediately grasped what was happening. Despite his pain, despite the venom clouding his thoughts, he recognized the trap that had been laid for him. Yet even as anger kindled in his heart at his daughter's audacity, he found himself almost admiring the sheer brilliance of her stratagem. Only the goddess could have conceived such a plan. Only she could have executed it with such flawless precision. "Daughter of cunning," he gasped between waves of torment. "You seek knowledge that was old when the stars were young. Do you think me so weakened by this poison that I would surrender the very foundation of my authority? I am he who rises at dawn. I am the maker of deities and mortals. I am the light that drives back the darkness. Are these titles not sufficient for your magic?" But the goddess shook her head with feigned regret, her eyes never leaving his pain-twisted features. "These are the appellations by which the world knows you, Father, but they are not the designation by which you know yourself. The venom recognizes only truth, only the deepest reality of your being. Without your hidden title, all my arts are powerless to help you." The poison's work continued relentlessly, each moment bringing the sovereign closer to a fate that no immortal being had ever faced. His golden radiance began to dim, his breathing grew labored, and the very fabric of reality started to tremble as the cornerstone of the universe weakened. If he died, the solar disk would cease to rise. The cycles of life would end, and all reality would tumble back into the primordial chaos from which it had emerged. Faced with the ultimate choice between personal secrecy and universal survival, the Creator made the only decision he could. With a voice that seemed to come from the very depths of eternity, he spoke the 13 syllables that contained the essence of his being, the concealed appellation that he had guarded since the moment of his first emergence from Nun's waters. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. As the sacred syllables left his lips, strength flowed into the goddess like a river of liquid starlight. Her consciousness expanded to encompass vistas of knowledge that no being save the Sun, Lord himself, had ever possessed. She felt the weight of reality itself settling upon her shoulders, the responsibility for maintaining the universal order suddenly shared between herself and her father. With her newfound authority, Isis spoke the counterspell with might that made the very foundations of heaven tremble. The venom that had brought the Creator to the brink of death was transmuted into harmless moisture. The pain that had racked his form dissolved like mist before the morning light. In moments, he was restored to his full strength, his golden radiance blazing forth once more to illuminate the cosmos. Yet both the Sun Lord and the goddess knew that something fundamental had changed in their relationship. The hidden appellation, once spoken, could not be unheard. The authority it contained, once shared, could not be withdrawn. Isis now possessed knowledge that made her nearly equal to the Creator himself, while he faced the universal consequences of having his deepest secret exposed. The immediate result was a weakening of his connection to the physical world. The concealed title had been the anchor that bound his essence to material reality. With its revelation, that anchor was loosened. He found himself growing more ethereal, more distant from earthly concerns, as if the very substance of his being was being drawn upward toward higher dimensions of reality. This growing detachment was not entirely unwelcome. The burden of directly governing both immortal and mortal realms had grown heavy over the eons, and the sovereign had long felt the need for a different kind of relationship with his handiwork. Perhaps this crisis, painful as it was, offered an opportunity for a new phase of his eternal life. Over the next few years, the retreat from worldly affairs picked up pace. The Sun Lord found his physical form becoming increasingly translucent, his voice growing fainter when he tried to communicate with earthbound beings, his very presence less substantial with each passing season. The other deities watched with growing concern as their ruler seemed to fade like a memory half forgotten. Thoth, keeper of wisdom and recorder of truth, approached his lord with scrolls containing calculations that confirmed their worst fears. "My sovereign," the ibis-headed deity said carefully, "my observations suggest that your essence is ascending to higher planes of reality. If this process continues unchecked, you will soon be unable to maintain any direct contact with the material universe. The solar disk itself may continue its course through stellar mechanics you have established, but your active guidance of the world will end." The creator nodded slowly, his expression peaceful despite the gravity of Thoth's words. "Perhaps it is time," he said, his voice carrying the weight of infinite weariness. "I have guided the universe through its infancy and watched it grow to maturity. Like any parent, I must eventually step back and allow my children to find their own way in the cosmos. The loss of my concealed appellation may have been the goddess's victory, but it has also shown me the path to a different kind of life." Choosing to end his engagement with the physical realm was a choice he weighed with great care. The Sun Lord spent long hours in consultation with his fellow deities, carefully arranging for the continuation of universal order in his absence. The daily journey of the solar disk would continue under the guidance of natural law and the watchful care of lesser solar beings. The judgment of souls would be handled by Osiris and his court in the underworld. The protection of Egypt would fall to the pharaohs, his earthly representatives, supported by the royal authority that would always flow through their blood. Most importantly, he established the principle that would govern his future relationship with the world. He would no longer intervene directly in earthly affairs, but neither would he abandon his beloved cosmos entirely. From his new realm in the highest heavens, he would watch over all reality, with the loving care of a grandfather, observing his grandchildren at play, close enough to help if truly needed, distant enough to allow them the freedom to learn and grow. As the moment of final ascension approached, the Creator gathered his family around his golden throne for a farewell that would echo through eternity. His form had become so ethereal that he appeared more as a concentration of light than a physical being. Yet his presence still radiated the love and wisdom that had guided the universe since its earliest moments. "My beloved children," he said, his voice now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, "the time has come for me to take my place in the highest realm of reality. Do not mourn this transition, for it is not an ending, but a transformation. Though you will no longer see me walking among you, though my voice will no longer ring in your ears with the authority of direct command, my love for you and for all the world remains unchanged and unchanging." The ascension itself was a wonder that defied description. As the Sun Lord spoke his final words to the assembled deities, his form began to dissolve into pure radiance, becoming one with the very light that illuminated the cosmos. The golden throne, upon which he had ruled for eons, cracked and crumbled to dust, its purpose fulfilled, while the palace around it was transformed into a temple where future generations would come to honor his memory. Yet even as his physical presence faded from the realm of deities, his influence did not disappear entirely. Priests in temples throughout the world suddenly found themselves filled with visions of his continued life, revelations of rituals and prayers that would maintain the connection between earthly and heavenly realms. The pharaohs received dreams that confirmed their appointment and taught them the sacred duties of their office. Most significantly, the daily journey of the solar disk across the sky took on new meaning. What had once been the simple movement of the Sun Lord in his bark became a symbolic representation of his eternal presence, a reminder that though he had withdrawn from direct rule, his light still blessed the world with each dawn, his warmth still sustained all life, his constancy still provided the foundation upon which universal order rested. From his new dwelling place in the highest heaven, the Creator looked down upon his handiwork with eyes that now saw not just the present moment, but all of time spread out like a vast tapestry. He witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, the birth and death of stars, the endless dance of order and chaos that gave meaning to reality. Through it all, he remained what he had always been, the loving Father of the world, the eternal guardian of universal balance, the light that would never be extinguished no matter how dark the night might seem. The age of direct rule over Earth had ended, but the age of eternal watchfulness had begun. And in that watchfulness lay the promise that no matter how far humanity might stray from the path of Ma'at, no matter what challenges the cosmos might face, the love that had first spoken light into the darkness would never abandon the children born from the Creator's tears of joy. From his new dwelling place in the highest reaches of heaven, the Creator established the rhythm that would govern all existence until the end of time itself. No longer would he walk directly among his children or rule from an earthly palace, but his presence would be felt in the most fundamental cycle of life, the eternal voyage of illumination across sky and through the shadowed realm beneath the world. This was to be his gift and his burden, his blessing and his eternal vigil, each day a triumph over shadow, each evening a struggle for the very survival of creation. The transformation of his daily routine into cosmic necessity began at the moment of his ascension. Where once Ra had traversed the heavens in simple majesty, now his movement became a ritual of renewal that touched every corner of existence. The golden vessel that carried him was no longer merely transportation, but a craft of hope, bearing within its sacred hull the promise that no matter how deep the gloom might grow, dawn would always return to drive it back. As the first radiance of each new day touched the eastern horizon, the solar disk began its emergence not as a simple celestial body, but as the visible manifestation of will made luminous. This was the moment of Khepri, the scarab-headed aspect of the sovereign, rolling the glowing orb across the vault of heaven like the sacred beetle rolls its precious burden across the earth. In this form, he embodied renewal, resurrection, the eternal return of life from the shadow of death. The Manjet ship, vessel of the morning voyage, was a wonder that surpassed all earthly craft. Its hull was wrought from gold that had never known tarnish, its sail woven from the very fabric of dawn itself, and its oars carved from wood that grew in gardens where no shadow ever fell. Upon its deck stood not merely the transformed ruler, but a crew of lesser deities whose sole purpose was to ensure the safe transit of brilliance across the dangerous expanse of sky. Saya, the god of perception, stood at the prow with eyes that could penetrate any illusion. any deception that the forces of entropy might weave to confuse the celestial craft's movement. His vigilance ensured that the ship would never lose its way, never be led astray by false horizons or phantom shores. Beside him, Hu, the deity of authoritative speech, spoke the words of power that commanded the winds, the clouds, and the very substance of the heavens to clear a path for their sacred trek. Heka, master of magic itself, wove protective spells around the vessel and its crew, creating barriers of pure force that could turn aside any weapon forged by the enemies of illumination. His incantations were not mere words, but fundamental alterations in the structure of reality, bending the laws of existence to serve the greater purpose of the celestial expedition. Yet it was the central figure upon the manjet that drew all eyes, mortal and immortal alike. The sovereign in his daytime aspect appeared as a falcon-headed deity whose piercing gaze could see all things in all places, whose golden radiance illuminated not merely the physical world, but the hidden depths of every heart, every soul, every secret corner where truth might hide from lesser lights. In his hands, he bore the Ankh, symbol of life itself, and there was scepter, emblem of dominion over all that existed. The trek across the sky was not merely a transit through empty space, but a passage through realms of meaning, through landscapes of symbol and significance that touched the lives of every being beneath the heavens. As the celestial ship sailed from east to west, it carried with it the prayers of mortals, the hopes of the living, the dreams of those who looked up at its movement and saw in its golden glow the promise of protection and eternal love. But as magnificent as the day expedition was, it paled beside the cosmic drama that unfolded each evening when Ra reached the western horizon and prepared to enter the realm of shadows. This was the moment of transformation from Khepri to Atum, from the ascending beetle to the aged master of completion, from the bright promise of morning to the tired wisdom of dusk. The manjet dissolved into golden mist, its purpose fulfilled, as another craft materialized to carry the Creator into the greatest challenge of his eternal existence. The Mesektet, vessel of the nightly expedition, was as different from its daytime counterpart as shadow differs from radiance. Where the morning ship gleamed with brilliant gold, the evening craft was wrought from silver that held within its depths the reflected glow of stars. Its hull was reinforced with adamant that could withstand the assault of chaos itself, its sail woven from the void between constellations, and its crew armed with weapons forged in the heart of dying suns. This ship carried not the falcon-headed master of day, but Atum in his ram-headed aspect, the ancient one whose curved horns spoke of wisdom earned through countless cycles of death and rebirth. His eyes, which had blazed like twin suns during the day expedition, now glowed with the softer luminescence of distant stars, their radiance penetrating the absolute gloom of the netherworld with the patient persistence of hope itself. The entrance to the Duat, the realm of the dead, was no simple gateway, but a cosmic threshold that existed simultaneously in all places and no place, a boundary between the world of the living and the domain of shadows. As the evening craft approached this liminal space, the very nature of existence began to change. The familiar laws of the upper world gave way to stranger principles, older rules that had governed reality since before the first dawn broke over the primordial waters of Nun. Each night, the Creator journeyed through not one realm, but 12. Each hour of darkness marked by a different region, each filled with its own tests and dangers. These were not arbitrary divisions, but fundamental structures of the cosmic framework. 12 portals through which the celestial ship must pass, if dawn was ever to come again to the world above. The first gate stood at the very threshold of the Duat, guarded by Sire, the god of perception, who served double duty as both crew member of the celestial craft and gatekeeper of the netherworld's entrance. Here dwelt the serpent known as Desert Protector, whose role was to challenge any who would enter the realm of shadows. Only by speaking the correct words of power, by demonstrating their right to pass through the domain of the dead, could Ra and his crew gain entry to the first region of their nightly trial. Beyond this initial threshold lay the Lake of Fire, a vast expanse of flame that burned without consuming, that gave light without warmth, that destroyed the wicked while purifying the righteous. Here the second gate was guarded by the terrible Swallower of Sinners, a being whose very name struck fear into the hearts of those who had lived lives of evil. The celestial vessel passed safely through these flames, protected by the righteousness of its crew and the pure purpose of its mission. The third gate opened onto a different kind of water, the Lake of Life, where the god Khnum dwelt as guardian and guide. This was the source from which the blessed dead could drink the waters of eternal existence, but it was forbidden to those still living, for mortal flesh could not contain such concentrated essence of vitality. Even Ra, immortal though he was, could only gaze upon these sacred waters without partaking of them, for his role was to bring life to others, not to seek it for himself. As the nightly expedition continued, each portal presented new wonders and new terrors. The fourth gate was the domain of measurement, where heavenly beings with knotted ropes determined the exact dimensions of the afterlife fields, ensuring that each soul received precisely the space their earthly deeds had earned them. Here were depicted the four races of humanity, as the Egyptians understood them, all equal in death, all subject to the same judgment. The fifth gate stood before the domain of Lady of Duration, and here the celestial ship faced its greatest trial of each nightly voyage. For this was the realm where Apophis dwelt, the great serpent of chaos whose very existence threatened the continuation of all order, all light, all hope. This monster, whose name meant evil of face, embodied everything that opposed the creative work of the Creator: entropy instead of growth, destruction instead of building, despair instead of hope. Apophis was no ordinary reptile, but a creature of cosmic proportions, so vast that its coils could encircle the entire world, so ancient that it remembered the time before creation, when only chaos ruled the void. Its body was composed of living darkness. Its scales were fragments of shattered stars, and its eyes burned with the cold fire of dissolution itself. When it roared its challenge to the celestial craft, the sound echoed through all the dimensions of reality, causing the dead to tremble in their tombs and the living to wake in terror from their dreams. Each evening's clash between light and chaos was no simple fight. It was a cosmic performance, the eternal struggle between order and unraveling, played out across time itself. Ra, armed with spears of condensed starlight and protected by the magic of his crew, fought not merely for his own survival, but for the continuation of all existence. Should he fail, should Apophis succeed in devouring the celestial vessel, the solar disk would never rise again, and all creation would tumble back into the primordial void from which it had emerged. Yet the conflict was never fought by the Creator alone. From among the blessed dead came champions to aid in the struggle, souls who had lived lives of such virtue that they earned the right to crew the evening ship during its most perilous transit. These righteous spirits took up oars of solidified radiance and spears of crystallized truth, adding their strength to the effort to defeat the serpent of chaos. Set, the god of storms and disorder, found his truest purpose in these nightly conflicts. Though his nature embodied disruption, These qualities made him the perfect warrior against the ultimate enemy of order. His storm winds confused Apophis's attacks. His lightning spears pierced the monster's shadowy hide, and his wild war cries rallied the other defenders to ever greater efforts. In the cosmic struggle between existence and void, even discord served the cause of creation. Mythic, the protective serpent whose coils shielded the celestial craft, wrapped his great length around the vessel and its crew, forming a living barrier against Apophis's assault. Where the chaos monster represented destruction, Mythic embodied protective power, using his own reptilian nature to counter the attacks of his cosmic opposite. His scales deflected the venom that Apophis spat. His strength turned aside the crushing coils that sought to destroy the ship of illumination. The climax of each conflict came when Ra himself took direct action against the great enemy. Rising from his throne within the protected circle of the celestial vessel, he spoke words of power that had been ancient when the stars were young, syllables that contained within them the fundamental forces that separated light from shadow, order from chaos, existence from void. These words struck Apophis like physical blows, each syllable a spear of pure creation that wounded the monster's essence and drove it back into the depths of primordial gloom. But no victory ever lasted, for Apophis wasn't just a beast to be slain. He was the very essence of entropy made flesh. Each dawn, as Ra emerged triumphant from the underworld, the great serpent began to heal from its wounds, preparing for the next evening's conflict. This was the eternal cycle. Order triumphant, but never final. Chaos defeated, but never destroyed. The struggle between creation and destruction renewed with each setting of the solar disk. As the celestial ship passed through the remaining portals of the Duat, the Creator began his transformation, from atom back to Kepri, from the aged wisdom of Dusk to the renewed vigor of dawn. The 6th through 11th gates presented their own challenges. Rivers of molten silver that had to be navigated, fields of flames that tested the purity of the vessel's crew, caverns where the voices of the unworthy dead cried out for mercy that could not be granted. The 12th gate stood at the very threshold between the underworld and the world of the living, guarded by 12 goddesses whose role was to midwife the solar disk's rebirth each dawn. These beings, whose names were known only to the highest initiates of the solar mysteries, performed the sacred ritual that transformed the tired god of evening into the renewed deity of morning. They bathed him in the waters of regeneration, clothed him in robes of pure radiance, and crowned him with the diadem of eternal renewal. As the first glow of dawn touched the eastern horizon, the evening craft dissolved into silver mist, its nightly purpose fulfilled, while the golden manjet materialized to carry the reborn creator across the sky once more. The cycle was complete, yet it was also just beginning, for each dawn brought new challenges, new opportunities for light to triumph over shadow, new proof that the love which had first spoken creation into existence would never abandon the world to the forces of chaos. But this nightly passage served another crucial purpose beyond the mere transit of the solar disk from west to east. During his voyage through the Duat, Ra carried with him the souls of the righteous dead, those who had passed the judgment of Osiris and earned the right to join the eternal crew of the celestial ship. These blessed spirits found in the nightly journey not torment but purpose, not exile but honor, for they had become partners in the most important work in all creation, ensuring that dawn would always follow darkness. The deceased souls who joined Ra's expedition were not passive passengers, but active participants in the cosmic drama. They took up positions along the vessel's sides, their spiritual forms blazing with the reflected glory of their divine captain. When Apophis attacked, they stood ready, with weapons forged from their own virtue, spears of crystallized good deeds and shields beaten from the gold of charitable acts. Their very presence strengthened the ship's defenses, for evil could not long endure in the company of such concentrated righteousness. Among these blessed dead were kings who had ruled with justice, priests who had served the gods faithfully, craftsmen who had created beauty to honor the divine, and humble farmers who had fed the hungry without thought of reward. Death had not ended their service, but transformed it, elevating them from earthly labors to cosmic responsibility. In Ra's nightly crew, the pharaoh sailed beside the peasant, the scribe beside the soldier, all united in the common cause of preserving light in the face of eternal darkness. The secrets of this nightly journey were revealed to the living through sacred texts inscribed on tomb walls and papyrus scrolls, the Duat, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns. These were not mere stories, but practical guides, instruction manuals for souls preparing to make their own passage through the Duat. Every spell, every protective formula, every word of power recorded in these texts had been tested in the fires of cosmic conflict, proven effective in the endless war between creation and chaos. From the highest heaven, Ra looked down upon this eternal drama with eyes that saw not just the surface events, but the deeper meaning that gave them significance. Each voyage across the sky was a promise kept, each passage through the underworld a victory won, each dawn a gift given freely to all who lived beneath the illumination. Though he no longer walked directly among his children, though his voice no longer rang with the authority of earthly command, his love for them was made manifest in the most fundamental gift of all, the assurance that no matter how deep the gloom might become, morning would always return to drive away the shadows and begin the world anew. The daily cycle of Ra's journey became the heartbeat of Egyptian civilization, the rhythm to which all life synchronized itself. Farmers planted their crops in harmony with the solar calendar. Priests timed their rituals to match the celestial progression, and even the flooding of the Nile followed the ancient pattern established when the Creator first began his eternal voyage between the worlds of light and shadow. In temples throughout the land, hymns were sung at dawn to welcome Ra's emergence from the underworld, prayers offered at noon to celebrate his triumph over chaos, and incantations chanted at dusk to wish him well on his perilous nightly journey. These were not empty ceremonies, but vital participations in the cosmic drama, ways for mortals to add their voices to the eternal struggle between order and entropy that determined the fate of all existence. Within the endless weave of the heavens, where eternal beings spun fate across time's boundless loom, the Creator was no longer the lone ruler he had once been. The pantheon had grown complex beyond his original design, populated not merely by his direct descendants, but by deities who had emerged from the depths of human devotion, from the marriage of cultures, and from the eternal human need to give form to the forces that shaped their lives. Among these heavenly multitudes, the Sun Lord's identity began to merge and blend, creating new forms of might that transcended his original essence. The first and most significant of these celestial unions came with Amun, the hidden one of Thebes, whose very name meant concealed or invisible. Where the solar sovereign embodied the visible brilliance of the celestial disk, Amun represented the unseen force that moved behind all existence, the breath that gave life before life took form, the thought that preceded action. When the political winds of Egypt shifted and Thebes rose to prominence, bringing with it the veneration of its patron, a cosmic marriage was arranged that would reshape the religious landscape of the ancient world. Their fusion wasn't simply for convenience. It was a spiritual inevitability, mirroring core truths about the essence of divine rule. Amun-Ra became the synthesis of hidden potential and visible manifestation, the unity of what was concealed and what was revealed. In this combined form, the Creator retained his luminous attributes, while gaining mastery over the mysteries that lay beyond mortal perception. He was the visible disk that traveled across the sky by day, and the invisible force that sustained all life throughout both daylight and shadow. This transformation brought with it new complexities of reverence and understanding. Priests who had once served either the Solar Lord or the Hidden One now found themselves ministering to a being whose essence encompassed both revelation and concealment, both the blazing clarity of noon and the mysterious depths of midnight. The hymns they sang wove together the ancient solar prayers with the more subtle invocations of the concealed deity, creating a liturgy that acknowledged the dual character of ultimate reality. Yet even as Amun-Ra established himself as the supreme being of the Egyptian pantheon, other celestial unions were taking shape, each reflecting different aspects of the Creator's multifaceted essence. Ra-Harakti emerged as the synthesis of the ancient Solar Lord, with the falcon deity of the horizon. In this manifestation, the sun's sovereign became specifically identified with the rising disk, the moment of daily triumph when illumination conquered shadow and hope renewed itself in the hearts of all living beings. Ra-Harakti was not merely the Creator wearing the attributes of the sky falcon, but a genuinely new immortal entity that embodied the essence of both, while transcending either individual identity. The falcon-headed figure, who appeared in tomb paintings and temple reliefs, bore the celestial disk upon his head and carried in his talons the symbols of life and dominion. But his fierce avian gaze spoke of the hunting instinct that had made the horizon Lord the protector of pharaohs and the enemy of chaos in all its forms. This union proved particularly significant in the political and religious life of Egypt, for it connected the ancient solar cult of Heliopolis with the equally ancient royal traditions associated with the falcon deity. Every pharaoh who ruled Egypt could now claim direct descent, not only from the Creator, but from the heavenly protector, linking the cosmic role of the sun with the earthly responsibility of kingship in an unbreakable chain of sacred legitimacy. The theological implications of these celestial mergers extended far beyond the borders of Egypt itself. As the empire expanded and came into contact with other cultures and their deities, the flexible character of the composite identity allowed for further synthesis and adaptation. When Egyptian traders and soldiers encountered Sobek, the crocodile lord of the Nile's dangerous waters, the solar sovereign absorbed this fierce aspect to become Sobek-Ra, master of both the life-giving radiance above and the primordial strength that lurked beneath the river's surface. Similarly, the meeting with Ptah, the craftsman deity of Memphis, whose hands had shaped the world through skilled labor, produced Ptah-Ra, a being who combined creative solar energy with the practical wisdom of the master artisan. This fusion reflected the understanding that existence was not merely an act of will, but also required the patient skill of one who knew how to shape raw materials into forms of lasting beauty and utility. Each of these celestial unions brought both strength and complexity, both expanded influence and potential conflict. For while the Creator gained new aspects and abilities through these mergers, he also inherited the rivalries and disputes that had previously belonged to his partners in immortality. The ancient tension between the Falcon Lord and the Storm Deity, which had divided the pantheon since the earliest days of Egyptian mythology, now became part of the Sun Sovereign's own internal struggles, as Ra-Harakti found himself eternally opposed to Set's chaotic influence. The rivalry with the Desert Lord took on cosmic proportions that went far beyond the original dispute over the succession to Osiris's throne. Set, as the master of storms and wasteland, represented the forces of existence that could destroy as easily as create, the necessary chaos that prevented the world from becoming stagnant, but that also threatened to overwhelm the careful balance that made life possible. In his role as Ra-Horakti, the solar sovereign found himself engaged in an eternal struggle with this aspect of discord that was more complex than his nightly contest with Apophis. Where Apophis represented pure entropy, the desire to return all existence to the primordial void, the Storm Lord embodied a more nuanced form of opposition, chaos that served a purpose, destruction that cleared the way for new growth, disruption that prevented the cosmic framework from becoming rigid and lifeless. The conflict between Ra-Horakti and the Desert Master was therefore not a simple contest between good and evil, but a sophisticated dance between complementary forces that required both opposition and cooperation to maintain the dynamic balance of reality. This celestial rivalry played out not only in the heavenly realm, but in the political sphere of Egypt itself, as different regions and dynasties aligned themselves with different aspects of the struggle. Periods when the Storm Lord's influence was strong were marked by political upheaval, foreign invasion, and social transformation, but also by innovation, expansion, and the breaking of old patterns that had outlived their usefulness. Times when Ra-Horakti held sway brought stability, prosperity, and cultural flowering, but also the risk of stagnation and resistance to necessary change. Dealing with the goddess of magic posed a wholly unique set of trials for the creator. The mistress of spells had grown immensely in strength since her theft of the Sun Lord's secret name, and her influence now extended into realms that had once been his exclusive domain, where the sovereign commanded through the natural legitimacy of existence itself. The sorceress wielded might through knowledge of the hidden laws that governed reality, the secret names and magical formulas that could bend the universe to serve the will of those wise enough to use them. Their relationship was simultaneously that of father and daughter, maker and maid, teacher and student, and rival forces contending for ultimate mastery over the cosmic framework. The goddess acknowledged the creator's primacy as the source from which all existence had emerged, but she also asserted her own independence as a master of forces that even the Sun Lord had not fully understood when he first spoke the world into being. Her magic could heal or harm, create or destroy, preserve life or ease the transition into death, abilities that made her indispensable to both immortals and mortals, but that also made her a potential threat to any dominion that sought to limit her influence. The resolution of this celestial tension came through recognition rather than conflict. The creator acknowledged that the universe had grown beyond his original design, that the act of speaking existence into being had set in motion forces and possibilities that transcended even his mighty will. The sorceress, for her part, recognized that her strength, however great, derived ultimately from the creative force that the Sun Lord embodied, that her magic worked by manipulating the fundamental structures he had established when he first emerged from the waters of Nun. This mutual recognition led to a new form of cooperation, in which the creator's cosmic legitimacy was balanced by the goddess's intimate knowledge of the practical applications of celestial might. When mortals faced challenges that required more than the steady provision of sunlight and seasonal change, when they needed healing for diseases that natural remedies could not touch, or protection from dangers that transcended the physical realm, the sorceress served as the intermediary who could translate the Sun Lord's benevolence into specific, practical assistance. In Osiris, the creator found another form of celestial alliance, born of eternal need and divine design, where the creator ruled the realm of the living and the daily world of sunlight and activity. The Lord of the Dead governed the kingdom of the departed, and the nightly world of rest and restoration. These were not competing jurisdictions, but complementary domains, two halves of a cosmic whole that required both illumination and shadow, both action and repose, both life and death to maintain the eternal cycle that sustained all existence. The nightly journey that the sun sovereign made through Osiris's domain was therefore not an invasion of foreign territory, but a necessary collaboration between cosmic partners. The judge of the dead ensured that the departed were properly evaluated and placed according to their merits, while the solar lord provided the energy that sustained even the afterlife, the radiance that made it possible for blessed souls to see and move and participate in the eternal cycle of renewal. This partnership extended to their respective roles in the lives of mortals. The Creator offered the energy and opportunity that made earthly life possible, the daily gift of sunlight that allowed crops to grow and civilizations to flourish. The underworld judge provided the promise that death was not an ending, but a transformation, that those who lived according to Ma'at would find in the afterlife not punishment, but reward, not extinction, but continuation, in a form more perfect than anything earthly existence could provide. Such cosmic connections weren't just symbolic, they had sweeping political effects across the mortal world. As Egypt's strength expanded and its influence spread throughout the ancient world, the flexible theology centered on the Creator's composite character provided a framework for incorporating foreign deities and beliefs without abandoning the fundamental principles of Egyptian religion. Local immortals could be understood as aspects or manifestations of the Sun Lord's universal might, while maintaining their own distinct identities and spheres of influence. This theological adaptability became one of Egypt's greatest strengths in managing its diverse empire. Rather than forcing conquered peoples to abandon their traditional beliefs, Egyptian administrators could demonstrate how regional deities were actually manifestations of the Creator's universal strength, how local religious practices were variations on themes that the Sun Sovereign himself had established when he first organized the cosmos. This approach created loyalty rather than resentment, integration rather than resistance, and helped to maintain Egyptian hegemony over vast territories for millennia. Yet this theological flexibility also created new challenges and potential contradictions. As the Solar Lord's identity became increasingly complex and multifaceted, as more and more local immortals were incorporated into his expanding character, the original simple clarity of the solar cult began to blur and fragment. Different temples emphasized different aspects of the composite being. Different regions developed their own interpretations of how the various celestial unions should be understood, and different periods of Egyptian history saw the prominence of different manifestations of the Creator's strength. The priesthood struggled to maintain coherent doctrine in the face of this expanding complexity. Theological schools developed elaborate systems for explaining how all the various aspects of the Sun Lord related to each other and to the fundamental unity that underlay them all. Hymns and prayers were composed that celebrated the multifarious character of the Creator while asserting his essential oneness. Ritual practices were developed that honored the different manifestations of celestial might, while maintaining the cosmic unity that held them all together. In the great temple complexes of Karnak and Luxor, where Amun-Ra reigned supreme, vast halls were filled with columns that rose like stone forests toward heaven, their capitals carved with lotus blossoms that symbolized the daily rebirth of the sun from the primordial waters. The walls were covered with hieroglyphic texts that told the story of existence in all its complexity, showing how the one source had manifested itself in countless forms while remaining eternally one. Priests who served in these temples underwent years of training to master the intricate theology of the composite being. They learned the secret names of all the Creator's manifestations, the proper rituals for invoking each aspect of celestial might, the correct formulas for mediating between the different personalities that existed within the unity of the Sun Lord's character. Their knowledge was both practical and mystical, both scholarly and experiential, for they served not merely as guardians of doctrine, but as active participants in the cosmic drama that played out daily in the marriage of heaven and earth. The common people of Egypt, who could not master such theological subtleties, experienced this celestial complexity in simpler but no less profound ways. They saw in the rising sun the face of Ra Harakti, bringing hope and renewal to each new day. They recognized in the life-giving flood of the Nile the strength of the Creator merged with Khnum, the potter deity who shaped human beings on his celestial wheel. They felt in the protection of their homes and families the presence of the Sun Lord united with their local protective immortals, creating a network of care that extended from the cosmic to the intimate. This popular understanding of the solar sovereign's multifaceted character created a religious experience that was both unified and diverse, both cosmic and personal. Worshippers could approach the Great Lord through whichever of his manifestations spoke most directly to their needs and circumstances, while still participating in the larger cosmic drama that connected all existence to the fundamental creative force that had spoken the world into being. From his dwelling place in the highest heaven, the Creator looked down upon this theological complexity with satisfaction rather than concern. The multiplication of his aspects and the elaboration of his relationships with other immortals reflected not confusion but growth, not fragmentation but enrichment. Like a master craftsman whose simple tools can create works of infinite variety and beauty, the Sun Lord had given birth to a religious system that could adapt to any circumstance, answer any need, and provide meaning for any sincere seeker after truth. The age of simple solar veneration was past, but it had given birth to something far more sophisticated and potent. A theological framework that could encompass all the complexities of existence while maintaining connection to the fundamental truths that had guided the cosmos from its very beginning. In the celestial unions and partnerships that now defined his character, the Creator had not lost his identity, but had found new ways to express the infinite love that had first moved him to speak illumination into the primordial shadow. Light returned to Heliopolis like the first breath of creation, while the sun's devoted priests prepared to rouse their divine master from the depths of shadow. These servants of heaven had risen before the first hint of light touched the eastern horizon, their movements precise and purposeful as they prepared for the daily ceremony that connected heaven to earth, the eternal to the temporal, the cosmic drama of renewal to the simple human need for hope. Sprawled across consecrated ground, the sanctuary stood like a city for gods. Its obelisks stabbed the heavens like prayers set in stone. Its pylons opened onto what felt like the threshold of forever. Within the innermost shrine, where only the highest-ranking clergy were permitted to enter, stood the golden sanctuary that housed the most sacred image of Ra. Not a crude idol carved by human hands, but a masterwork of celestial craft that seemed to capture within its metal form the very essence of radiance. As the first priest approached the shrine in the pre-dawn darkness, his voice rose in the ancient hymn that had been sung at this moment for countless generations. Awake in peace, great Lord of the eastern horizon. Rise in splendor, you who drive away the shadow and bring illumination to the world. The gates of heaven open before you, the stars bow down in reverence, and all existence rejoices at your coming. The ceremony of awakening was far more than mere formality. It was a precise recreation of the cosmic drama that played out each day in the highest realms of reality. As the cleric spoke the sacred words, he symbolically participated in the moment when the sovereign emerged triumphant from his nightly battle with the forces of chaos, when Khepri pushed the disk above the eastern horizon, when light conquered shadow once more in the eternal struggle that gave meaning to all life. Other clergy joined their voices to the hymn, each adding their own part to the complex harmony that rose toward heaven like incense made of sound. They sang of the Sun Lord's many names and aspects, of his victories over the serpent of entropy, of his love for the mortals who looked to him for sustenance and protection. Their words were not merely praise, but magical formulae that helped to ensure the solar disk's successful emergence, human participation in the work of maintaining cosmic order. As the first rays of actual sunlight began to penetrate the sanctuary, touching the golden shrine with fingers of natural radiance, the attendants performed the ceremony known as the opening of the mouth. This was not the rite performed for the dead, but its celestial prototype, the daily resurrection of the solar deity from his nightly journey through the underworld. Sacred implements were touched to the shrine, while incantations were spoken that restored the Creator's full power after his ordeal in the realm of shadows. Next came the morning offering, a ritual dance of devotion, where each gift symbolized the loyalty of all Egypt to their divine king. Bread baked from the finest wheat, beer brewed from barley grown in fields blessed by the radiance, fruits and vegetables that owed their existence to the life-giving power of the sun. All were placed before the shrine, while prayers were offered for the continued prosperity of the land and its people. But the clergy understood that their role extended far beyond the sanctuary walls. They were not merely servants of a single deity, but guardians of the cosmic order that sustained all existence. The hymns they sang and the ceremonies they performed were part of a vast network of religious activity that stretched across Egypt and beyond, connecting every town and village to the great drama of daily renewal that gave meaning to mortal life. In shrines throughout the land, lesser attendants echoed the morning prayers. At the moment when sunlight first touched their altars, farmers paused in their work to speak words of gratitude for the light that would help their crops grow. Craftsmen began their daily labor with invocations that asked for the Sun Lord's blessing on their skill. Even children learned simple songs that celebrated the return of illumination and warmth to a world that had spent the dark hours in anxious waiting. The hymn to Ra Horakti became one of the most beloved prayers in all of Egyptian literature. Its verses sung not only by the clergy, but by common people who found in its words a perfect expression of their relationship to the source of all life. Praise to you, Lord of the eastern horizon, when you rise and illuminate the earth with your beauty. You are the King of the gods, the Father of eternity, the Maker of what is and what shall be. All eyes behold you, for there is none like you among the immortals. Yet the morning prayers were only the beginning of the daily cycle of ceremonial attention that surrounded the Creator. At noon, when his power reached its zenith and his radiance blazed with maximum intensity, special rites were performed to celebrate his triumph over all forms of darkness and opposition. These midday observances were often elaborate affairs, particularly in the great sanctuaries, where processions of clergy carried sacred barks through halls lined with columns that seemed to stretch toward infinity. This ritual vessel was no ordinary creation. It mirrored the celestial boat that bore Ra across the sky each day. Crafted from the finest materials, gold that never tarnished, silver that held the light of stars, precious woods from trees that grew in holy groves. It was both a work of art and a magical instrument that made the presence accessible to mortal worshippers. When the bark was carried through the sanctuary courts, it was as if the Sun Lord himself was making a royal progress through his earthly domain. Crowds of worshippers lined the processional route, many traveling great distances for the privilege of being present when the image passed before them. They sang hymns, offered prayers, and reached out to touch the carrying poles, or even the shadow of the sacred vessel, believing that such contact could bring healing, protection, and blessing to their lives. As night approached, the ceremonies shifted in tone, marked by a somber reverence suited to the god's preparation for his hazardous journey below. As the disk began its descent toward the western horizon, attendants performed rites designed to strengthen their lord for the trials that awaited him in the realm of shadows. These observances included the recitation of protective spells, the offering of weapons symbolically forged from light itself, and the singing of songs that would accompany the deity through his nightly voyage. The rappelling of Apophis ceremonies were perhaps the most dramatic of all the evening observances. Clergy would create wax figures of the Chaos Serpent, inscribing them with hieroglyphs that detailed its crimes against the cosmic order, then destroy these images through fire while reciting spells that weakened the monster's power to threaten the Sun Lord's passage through the underworld. These were not merely symbolic acts, but genuine magical workings that added the strength of human will and devotion to the struggle against entropy and dissolution. As darkness fell and the visible sun disappeared below the western horizon, the attendants would light sacred fires and oil lamps throughout the sanctuary complex, creating earthly reflections of the radiance that continued to burn in the realm of shadows. These flames were maintained throughout the night by specially trained servants who understood that their vigilance participated in the cosmic drama, that by keeping light alive in the world of mortals, they helped to ensure that Ra would successfully complete his nightly journey and emerge victorious at dawn. The royal connection to these daily cycles of ceremony was both intimate and essential. Every pharaoh bore the title Son of Ra, marking his role not merely as a political ruler, but as the earthly representative of the celestial sovereign. This was no empty honorific, but a sacred responsibility that required the king to participate actively in the religious life of his kingdom, serving as the chief officiant in the most important observances and ensuring that the proper relationships between heaven and earth were maintained. His royal calling took shape in the regalia he bore and the ceremonial traditions that marked his kingship. The uraeus cobra that adorned his crown was not merely decorative, but was understood to be the actual eye of the Creator, the protective force that had emerged from the Sun Lord's own gaze to serve as guardian of royal authority. When enemies looked upon the king in his full regalia, they were looking upon the earthly manifestation of power itself, concentrated in human form, but retaining its essential celestial character. More than a symbol of rule, the scepter embodied the pharaoh's responsibility to care for his people with both strength and wisdom. The crook and flail, symbols that appeared in tomb paintings and sanctuary reliefs throughout Egyptian history, showed the dual nature of royal responsibility, the gentle guidance represented by the shepherd's crook and the stern correction symbolized by the threshing flail. Both were necessary tools for maintaining the order that reflected the cosmic harmony established by the Sun Lord himself. The false beard worn by monarchs, including the rare female rulers like Hatshepsut, connected the living king to the wisdom of the ancestors, and particularly to Ra in his aspect as Atum, the aged deity of evening and completion. This was not an attempt at masculine disguise, but a sacred symbol that linked the temporal ruler to the eternal patterns of kingship that transcended the limitations of mortal gender and individual personality. Royal participation in religious ceremonies was not optional, but essential to the proper functioning of the cosmic order. When the pharaoh performed the morning prayers to greet the rising sun, he was not acting as a private individual, but as the representative of all Egypt, offering the devotion of the entire nation to their celestial father. When he made offerings in the great sanctuaries, the gifts he presented carried the spiritual weight of every farmer's harvest, every craftsman's skill, every merchant's profit, all the prosperity of the land concentrated into a single act of service. Beginning with coronation itself, the royal tomb's careful design became one of the clearest reflections of that sacred relationship. These were not merely preparations for death, but for transformation, for the moment when the earthly representative of the Creator would join his celestial Father in the eternal cycle of renewal that sustained all existence. The walls of royal tombs were covered with texts from the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, all of which contained detailed instructions for navigating the trials that awaited the royal soul in its journey through the underworld. These texts were not general guides, but specifically adapted versions that took into account the pharaoh's unique role as the son of the Sun Lord. They contained special spells that only a king could use, secret names that were revealed only to those who had ruled as earthly representatives of celestial authority, and protective formulae that drew their power from the royal connection to the source of all light and life. The field of reeds, the paradise that awaited the worthy dead, was described in these royal texts as a place where the departed monarch would continue to serve Ra in an even more intimate capacity than had been possible during earthly life. There, freed from the limitations of mortal flesh, the royal soul could participate directly in the daily journey across the sky, could stand at the Creator's side during the nightly battles with chaos, could experience the full glory of radiance without the veils and filters that made such experience bearable to mortal senses. Yet the benefits of royal connection extended beyond the king himself to encompass all of Egyptian society. The prosperity of the land, the regularity of the Nile's flooding, the fertility of the fields, the health of the people, all were understood to depend upon the proper maintenance of the relationship between the earthly ruler and his celestial father. When this relationship was strong and properly maintained through correct observance and moral behavior, all of Egypt flourished. When it was weakened through royal impiety or ceremonial neglect, the entire kingdom suffered the consequences. This understanding created a religious system that was both hierarchical and democratic, both exclusive and inclusive. While only the pharaoh could serve as the direct representative of the Sun Lord, every Egyptian could participate in the relationship through their connection to the royal person. The taxes they paid, the labor they contributed to royal projects, the loyalty they showed to the crown, all became forms of religious service that connected them to the cosmic drama of renewal and restoration. Each festival that lit up the religious calendar became an open door for the masses to engage in shared acts of worship. During the Opet festival, when the sacred bark of Amun-Ra was carried in procession from Karnak to Luxor, hundreds of thousands of people lined the processional route, their presence transforming what might have been a purely royal ceremony into a celebration that engaged the entire population in active devotion to their celestial sovereign. The said festival, celebrated to renew the pharaoh's appointment after 30 years of rule, was another occasion when the entire kingdom participated in the cosmic drama of renewal. The ceremonies that took place during this festival were understood to parallel the Creator's own periodic renewal, the moments when his power was restored and refreshed for the continuation of his eternal service to existence. Schools attached to the great religious complexes ensured that the knowledge necessary for proper service was preserved and transmitted from generation to generation. Young men who showed aptitude for religious learning were trained not only in the practical skills of reading and writing, but in the deeper mysteries of cosmic law and relationship. They learned to calculate the movements of stars and planets, to predict the flooding of the Nile, to interpret dreams and omens, and to perform the countless observances that maintain the connection between heaven and earth. These schools were more than educational institutions. They were repositories of civilization itself, places where the accumulated wisdom of millennia was preserved against the ravages of time and the disruptions of political change. The texts they maintained, the traditions they preserved, and the skills they taught formed the foundation upon which Egyptian culture rested, the bedrock of knowledge and practice that allowed the kingdom to maintain its identity and coherence through centuries of foreign conquest and internal upheaval. The influence of Egyptian religious practices extended far beyond the borders of Egypt itself, carried by traders, diplomats, and conquerors to distant lands, where they mingled with local traditions to create new forms of worship. The creator's cult established shrines in Nubia, Palestine, and even as far away as the Aegean Islands, each adapted to local conditions, but all maintaining connection to the central mystery of daily renewal that lay at the heart of Egyptian religious experience. From his dwelling place in the highest heaven, the Sun Lord looked down upon this vast network of devotion with satisfaction and love. The elaborate ceremonies, the daily prayers, the royal connections, and the popular festivals all served to maintain the living relationship between celestial and mortal that had been his purpose from the moment he first wept. Tears of joy at the beauty of his handiwork. Through the voices of his clergy, the devotion of his royal representatives, and the simple faith of common worshippers, the cosmic drama of renewal continued to unfold, ensuring that the light would never be extinguished and that the love which had spoken the world into being would continue to guide it toward its ultimate destiny. The wheel of ages turned with inexorable slowness, carrying with it the rise and fall of dynasties, the ebb and flow of empires, and the gradual metamorphosis of the religious landscape that had once seemed as eternal as the stars themselves. Where the sanctuaries of the Sun Lord had once dominated every horizon, where his priests had once guided the sacred life of millions, where his daily journey had once provided the central organizing principle for an entire civilization, new currents of devotion began to flow, carrying with them different gods, altered practices, and transformed understandings of the relationship between mortal and celestial. Rather than a sudden collapse, the change emerged over time, as naturally as a river reshapes its path, or monuments yield to wind and rain. In the great temples of Memphis and Thebes, the morning hymns still rose to greet the dawn. The sacred barks still processed through columned halls, and the ancient rituals still connected earth to heaven through the precise performance of ceremonies, old when the pyramids were young. Yet something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of devotion, a subtle alteration in emphasis that would ultimately reshape the entire religious world. The cult of Osiris, which had always existed alongside the solar veneration as a complementary aspect of truth, began to expand beyond its traditional boundaries. Where the Lord of the Dead had once been content to rule his shadowy kingdom, while Ra governed the realm of illumination, the followers of the Green God now began to emphasize his role, not merely as judge of the departed, but as the promise of resurrection for all who lived according to Ma'at. The mystery religions that grew around his death and rebirth offered initiates a more personal, more intimate relationship with celestial power than the cosmic drama of stellar devotion had traditionally provided. This was not apostasy or abandonment of ancient truth, but rather a natural evolution in mortal understanding of the sacred mysteries. The great theological synthesis that had characterized the height of Egyptian civilization, the recognition that all gods were aspects of a single ultimate reality, remained intact. But the emphasis began to shift from the public, cosmic dimensions of heavenly relationship to the private, personal experience of individual salvation and metamorphosis. In the underground chambers where mystery initiations took place, candidates for enlightenment learned that the daily journey of the Creator through the underworld was not merely an external cosmic event, but a pattern that could be replicated in the soul. The death and resurrection of Osiris was not simply a mythological narrative, but a practical guide to the inner change that awaited those who could die to their lower nature and be reborn into awareness. The nightly battle with Apophis was not just the struggle between cosmic order and chaos, but the internal conflict between wisdom and ignorance, love and fear, illumination and shadow that played out within every heart. These teachings did not reject the stellar theology, but deepened it, revealing layers of meaning that had always been present but had perhaps been overshadowed by the spectacular external manifestations of the Sun Lord's veneration. The priests who guided these mysteries were often the same men who performed the daily temple rituals, the scholars who copied and preserved the ancient texts, the guardians of traditions that stretched back to the very beginning of Egyptian civilization. They understood that they were not replacing the old religion, but revealing its hidden depths, not abandoning the Creator, but discovering new ways to experience his eternal presence. The political upheavals that marked the later periods of Egyptian history, the invasions of foreign powers, the establishment of Greek and Roman rule, the gradual decline of native Egyptian authority, created pressures that accelerated these religious transformations. When traditional institutions could no longer provide the stability and security that people craved, when the old certainties were challenged by foreign ideas and practices, when the very survival of Egyptian culture seemed threatened by outside forces, the deeper, more personal aspects of religious experience became increasingly important. Foreign rulers, seeking to legitimize their authority and win the loyalty of their Egyptian subjects, often embraced the traditional religious forms while subtly altering their content. Alexander the Great visited the oracle of Amun-Ra at Siwa Oasis and emerged with the claim that he was the son of the god, thus linking himself to the ancient pattern of kingship that had sustained Egyptian civilization for millennia. The Ptolemaic pharaohs who succeeded him maintained the external forms of traditional royal ceremony, while introducing Greek philosophical concepts that gradually transformed the underlying understanding of celestial nature and mortal destiny. Roman emperors went even further, incorporating Egyptian religious symbols and practices into the imperial cult, while systematically dismantling the economic and political foundations that had supported the traditional priesthood. The great temples became museums of their former glory, magnificent monuments to a past that seemed increasingly distant and irrelevant to the practical concerns of daily life under foreign rule. Yet even as the external structures of the Creator's veneration declined, the essential truths that his cult had preserved and transmitted found new expressions and new audiences. The Hermetic texts that emerged during the Hellenistic period claimed to preserve the ancient wisdom of Thoth, the scribe of Ra, in forms adapted to Greek philosophical concepts and Roman practical concerns. These writings, while using different terminology and addressing different audiences, maintained the fundamental insights about the relationship between cosmic order and consciousness that had always been at the heart of stellar theology. The mystery cults that spread throughout the Mediterranean world, the reverence of Isis and Serapis, the mysteries of Mithras, the various Gnostic systems that promised salvation through secret knowledge, all bore traces of Egyptian religious influence, carrying forward in transformed ways the ancient understanding that mortals were called to participate in celestial life, that the cosmos was structured according to principles of justice and harmony, that death was not an ending but a metamorphosis. Christianity, when it finally emerged as the dominant religious force in the Roman world, incorporated many elements that would have been familiar to the priests of the Sun Lord, even while claiming to represent a completely new revelation. The daily cycle of prayer that structured monastic life echoed the ancient temple schedules that had once greeted the rising disk with hymns of praise. The emphasis on radiance conquering shadow, on resurrection triumphing over death, on love extending to embrace all humanity, reflected themes that had been central to stellar devotion for thousands of years. Christian art, especially within Egypt, carried unmistakable echoes of ancient pharaonic imagery. Images of Christ as the Good Shepherd bore obvious similarities to depictions of Ra as the sovereign who guided his flock with crook and staff. Representations of the Virgin Mary often incorporated symbols and poses that had previously been associated with Isis, the mother who protected her son and interceded for humanity. The Christian cross itself, particularly in its ankh-like forms, echoed the ancient Egyptian symbol of life that had been carried by gods and pharaohs as a sign of their power over death. Even the theological controversies that divided early Christianity, disputes about the nature of Christ, the relationship between celestial and mortal, the possibility of theosis or deification, reflected questions that Egyptian priests and philosophers had been exploring for millennia. The Coptic Christian communities that emerged in Egypt preserved not only the Christian gospel, but also the intellectual tradition of Alexandria, the synthesis of Greek philosophy and Egyptian wisdom that had made that city one of the great centers of learning in the ancient world. In the monasteries of the Egyptian desert, where Christian hermits sought union with God through prayer and asceticism, the influence of ancient Egyptian devotion was particularly strong. The daily rhythm of prayer and meditation that governed monastic life echoed the temple schedules that had once marked the hours of the Creator's journey across the sky. The emphasis on dying to the world and being reborn in Christ reflected the mystery initiations that had promised change through participation in the death and resurrection of Osiris. The very landscape of the desert, where these monks sought enlightenment, was the same harsh environment where ancient Egyptians had discovered the power of Set, the necessary chaos that stripped away illusions and tested the strength of commitment. The Arabic conquest of Egypt in the 7th century brought new challenges and new opportunities for the preservation and transmission of ancient wisdom. Islamic scholars, particularly those influenced by Hermetic and Neoplatonic traditions, found in the remnants of Egyptian learning valuable resources for their own theological and philosophical investigations. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the great centers of learning in Cordoba and Cairo, the universities that emerged throughout the Islamic world, all drew upon the intellectual heritage that had been preserved and developed in the temples and schools of pharaonic Egypt. Alchemical texts that claimed descent from Hermes Trismegistus, astronomical treatises that preserved Egyptian methods of celestial calculation, medical works that transmitted the healing wisdom of ancient temple physicians, all served as bridges between the old world and the new, carrying forward essential elements of Egyptian culture in forms adapted to Islamic civilization. The medieval period saw a remarkable flowering of this synthetic tradition, as scholars like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Ibn Sina developed philosophical systems that combined Aristotelian logic, Neoplatonic metaphysics, and elements drawn from ancient Egyptian sources. These thinkers, while working within explicitly Islamic frameworks, preserved and developed insights about the relationship between cosmic order and consciousness that had their ultimate roots in the temple schools, where priests had once studied the mysteries of the Sun Lord's daily journey. Even the popular forms of Islamic devotion showed traces of Egyptian influence. The dhikr practices of Sufi orders, with their emphasis on repetitive prayer formulas and the mystical change of consciousness, bore similarities to the magical techniques that Egyptian priests had used to align themselves with cosmic rhythms. The veneration of saints and their tombs that characterized popular Islam in Egypt maintained patterns of reverence that had ancient roots in the cult of Osiris and the respect for the blessed dead who had achieved metamorphosis through righteousness. The Renaissance rediscovery of Hermetic texts brought ancient Egyptian wisdom directly into European intellectual life, where it influenced figures as diverse as Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, and Giordano Bruno. These scholars, working to revive what they saw as the pristine wisdom of antiquity, found in the Egyptian materials resources for challenging medieval theological orthodoxies and developing new understandings of the relationship between mortal and celestial. European thought during the scientific revolution was shaped in part by techniques of measurement and observation, preserved in works descended from Egyptian knowledge. The heliocentric astronomy of Copernicus and Galileo, while based on new observations and calculations, echoed the ancient recognition that the stellar disk was the center around which earthly life revolved, the source of energy that sustained all existence. Even the Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and natural law, carried forward themes that had been central to Egyptian thought for millennia. The recognition that the universe operated according to discoverable principles, that mortals could understand and work with these cosmic laws, that knowledge was power and wisdom was the key to flourishing, all reflected insights that had been encoded in the myths and rituals of the Creator's veneration from the very beginning. The modern rediscovery of ancient Egypt through archaeology and the decipherment of hieroglyphics opened new windows into the world that had once centered on the reverence of the sun god. Scholars like Champollion, Mariette, and Petrie revealed the sophisticated theological and philosophical systems that had underlain the seemingly simple stellar cult, showing how the ancient Egyptians had developed remarkably subtle understandings of consciousness, cosmology, and the condition of mortality. Yet even as modern scholarship revealed the complexity and sophistication of ancient Egyptian religion, the essential truths that the Creator had embodied continued to find expression in new forms, adapted to contemporary needs and understanding. The psychological insights of depth psychology, particularly the work of Carl Jung on archetypes and the collective unconscious, drew heavily upon Egyptian symbolism and mythology to explore the dynamics of development. Environmental movements that emphasized humanity's dependence upon stellar energy and the need to live in harmony with natural cycles echoed themes that had been central to the Sun Lord's veneration. The recognition that the disk was indeed the source of virtually all energy on Earth, that life depended absolutely upon the continuation of cosmic processes beyond mortal control, that civilization was part of a larger web of relationships that connected Earth to sky and present to past, all reflected insights that Egyptian priests had encoded in their myths and rituals thousands of years before. New Age movements that emphasized personal metamorphosis, cosmic consciousness, and the potential within every being drew freely upon Egyptian sources, finding in the ancient texts and symbols resources for contemporary seeking. While often lacking the rigorous training and deep cultural knowledge that had characterized traditional Egyptian priesthood, these modern movements testified to the enduring power of the vision that Ra had embodied, the recognition that mortals were called to participate in celestial life, that change was possible, that the radiance within could overcome any shadow without. From his dwelling place in the highest heaven, the Creator looked down upon all these developments with the patient love of a father, watching his children grow and change while remaining fundamentally true to their essential nature. The forms of reverence had altered, the languages of prayer had multiplied, the cultural contexts had shifted beyond recognition, yet the fundamental need for connection with the source of all reality remained constant. The daily rising of the Dusk still called forth wonder and gratitude from hearts, even if those hearts no longer consciously addressed their praise to the Sun Lord by name. The rhythm of day and night still structured life, even if few remembered that this cycle had once been understood as the visible manifestation of love. The hope for metamorphosis, for resurrection, for the triumph of radiance over shadow still stirred in souls, even if they sought its fulfillment through different paths and different practices. In the end, the Creator's greatest victory was not the preservation of any particular form of reverence or any specific religious institution, but the perpetuation of the essential insights that had made his cult a beacon of wisdom for thousands of years. The recognition that reality was fundamentally good, that consciousness was the highest form of cosmic evolution, that love was the force that held all things together, that every being carried within themselves a spark of radiance that could never be extinguished. These truths had survived every historical upheaval, every cultural challenge, every test of their continued relevance. What kept the Sun Lord alive in myth wasn't temples, rituals, or sacred texts, but the lasting human ability to feel and respond to a presence that lit up reality from the inside. As long as mortals continued to seek meaning beyond the material, to hunger for change beyond the merely physical, to hope for love beyond the merely personal, the essential reality that Ra represented would continue to find expression in new forms, new languages, new practices, adapted to the needs of each age. The disk that rose each morning over the ruins of ancient temples was the same that had inspired the first prayers in the dawn of civilization. The radiance that touched the earth with life-giving energy was the same that would continue to sustain reality long after all current forms of culture had passed away. In that continuity of cosmic process, in that reliability of natural law, in that faithfulness of love, the deepest promises of the Creator's veneration found their ultimate fulfillment. So the story of the Sun God wasn't one of fading away, but of transformation and a presence that never left. Like the daily journey from death to resurrection that he had modeled in his passage through the underworld, the apparent withdrawal from active involvement in affairs was itself a form of victory, a demonstration that love was so deeply woven into the fabric of reality that it could survive any external challenge, overcome any apparent defeat, and emerge in new forms that carried forward the essential wisdom of all the ages that had come before. His decline was never truly a fall. It was the seed of a beginning, where what seemed like loss gave way to insight, and where absence made space for a more tender nearness. In the whisper of wind through ancient ruins, in the play of radiance on sacred waters, in the stirring of hope in hearts that had never forgotten how to reach toward the glow, the Creator continued his eternal journey, carrying with him all those who still knew how to recognize the luminescence that had never ceased to shine in the depths of the soul.